Question. Siobhan McDonough.
Mr Speaker, to ask the Foreign and Commonwealth Office what representations his department has made to the Government of Sri Lanka regarding the safety of the 1,193 UNHCR refugees in Negombo who have fled to Sri Lanka fleeing religious persecution from their countries and now fear for their safety following the terrible Easter Sunday bombings in Sri Lanka.
Minister Mark Field.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Following the Easter Sunday attacks in Sri Lanka, there have, as the Honourable Lady will be aware, been reports of isolated incidents of violence and reports of intimidation and discrimination against Muslims, refugees and asylum seekers. In Negombo, one of the suburbs to the north of Colombo where the terrorist attacks took place, some 985 refugees and asylum seekers were forcibly displaced from their ordinary places of residence, according to UN figures. These refugees and asylum seekers, who are mostly of Pakistani origin, are being temporarily housed and protected to meet their immediate security and humanitarian needs. Our High Commission in Colombo, led by our outstanding High Commissioner, James Doris, is in contact with the government and UN agencies to work towards a more sustainable solution. And, of course, the UK, along with other partners, is monitoring that situation carefully. The UN is providing basic support for food, drinking water and immediate medical assistance, and also coordinating with civil society to provide additional relief items. The humanitarian situation at the police station in Negombo is a concern, and the police themselves have so far been very welcoming, but we do understand that the facilities there are insufficient. Staff of our High Commission are also assisting in advocating and coordinating with the Sri Lankan government more generally to identify safe and secure relocation options to ensure protection of both refugees and asylum seekers. We also understand that processes are underway for some of the refugees to be resettled in third countries. Some 412 refugees are currently in the midst of a resettlement process of the UNHCR. Ministers and representatives of the UK government have, of course, met with Sri Lankan counterparts over these past 3 weeks to reinforce the importance of inclusivity and respect for human rights in response to the Easter Sunday attacks, but also to underline the importance of Sri Lankans working together to avoid intercommunal tensions. And as I think was brought up in the earlier questions, I think we can all be pleased, but without being complacent about it, that actually over these past 3 weeks there has been a sense of unity within Sri Lanka as a whole. My right honourable friend, the Minister for Security and Economic Crime, visited Sri Lanka on the 1st and 2nd, or 2nd and 3rd of May, I should say, and met up with the President, the Prime Minister, military and religious leaders and senior government officials, highlighting the importance of these points and also to talk more generally about security resilience. Lord Ahmed from the House of Lords FCA Minister and I have met with the Sri Lankan High Commissioner over the past fortnight to raise general concerns about refugees and minority rights in Sri Lanka. And, Mr Speaker, if I may just say, I think all of us would want to put on record our grave concern about what happened. These were terrible, terrible events, and our commiserations go to all of those who remain affected and will be affected, I think, for some years to come after these terrible attacks.
Siobhan McDonough.
Can I thank the Minister for his response? I'm sure that we all would like to send our heartfelt sympathy to the people of Sri Lanka and all of those mourning the loss of friends and family following the terrible Easter bombings. Now the spotlight of the media has turned, another tragedy is unfolding. 1,193 UNHCR refugees and asylum seekers, including 174 children, have led to 3 makeshift refugee camps in Negombo: Patiala Ahmadi Mosque, Negombo Ahmadiyya Mosque and Negombo Police Station. Hostility towards Muslims following the attacks has led to growing violence, leading the refugees and asylum seekers to seek urgent safety. The condition of these camps are worryingly inhumane. There is a severe lack of food and water, minimal toilet facilities, no medical facilities or basic sanitary facilities, no walls or beds and not enough space to lie down. Over the bank holiday weekend, a child was born on the floor of one of these mosques. No doctor was present. Just this morning, latest updates indicated that more than one person had been taken to hospital due to illness. Mr. Speaker, these refugees and asylum seekers are largely from religious minorities who have suffered threats, attacks and persecution in their home countries. Many are Ahmadi Muslims who have fled Pakistan, where their religious views may be punishable with death. Ahmadis identify as Muslims but do not believe that Muhammad was the final prophet sent to guide mankind, leading many of these refugees to be deemed non-Muslim in their home countries and face persecution because of their beliefs. Now, in Sri Lanka, they face an imminent threat to their safety because they are considered to be Muslims. The welfare of those in these makeshift camps is of immediate and serious concern, as is the possibility that these people will be forced to return to where they fled from. Would the Minister use all in his power to expedite the resettlement of these UNHCR refugees to safe third countries?
Yeah. Minister.
May I thank the Honourable Lady for Mitcham and Morden. She's very persistent. This is the third day running, I know, she has applied for a UQ. I think Robert the Bruce would be proud of if you don't succeed, try again. But she's absolutely right. She makes a very serious point, not least about the Ahmadi Muslims and the terrible paradox of their situation, that whilst they are regarded as outcasts in much of the Muslim world, here they are finding themselves very much at the forefront of some of the tensions. As I say, I think it is important that we don't overstate the tension. I'm not anyway, as I've said in my original statement, we clearly, as a High Commission on the ground and with our UNHCR partners, will do all that we can. But I think it is, remarkable, given the history of intercommunal conflict within Sri Lanka, that over these past 3 weeks there has been relatively little that has led to direct concern. However, she is also quite right to say that according to UN figures, with over 1,698 asylum seekers and refugees now having to be housed in 3 unsatisfactory makeshift camps in the Negombo police station and at the 2 mosques in the vicinity, this clearly is not a sustainable position going forward. May I just say this, that civil society contacts have also reported there have been other incidents of displacement and harassment of refugees in some other parts of Colombo. We clearly are working together. And I should perhaps say it is important to recognise we work together with many other High Commissions and embassies in that area, including the US, Canadian and a number of the European High Commissioners who have a strong Sri Lankan diaspora that they also wish to represent.
Vienna Bruce.
The Minister be more specific about the support which has been given by the UK Government to the Christian community in Sri Lanka following the Easter Sunday attacks.
Yeah. Minister.
May I thank my honourable friend for Congleton, and I'm always very touched by the amount of work that she does in this regard, not just, of course, in Sri Lanka, but across the world. We, of course, have been concerned at reports of minorities being intimidated, and as she rightly says, the focus of the attacks on Easter Sunday was obviously at the Christian community in a number of different locations across Sri Lanka. As she will know, we welcome the interim report by the Bishop of Truro on the persecution of Christians worldwide. We look forward to the final report to be published in the summer. Clearly, freedom of religion and belief is a priority for the Foreign Office. And may I say that specifically we are working, and obviously our High Commissioner is working, to ensure that the threads of that report that are particularly relevant to Sri Lanka will obviously have an impact there. The Christian community has been long-standing in Sri Lanka. Part of it, of course, is Roman Catholic, other bits are Anglican from our colonial times. But we hope to work together with all Christian communities, but also to try and ensure that this is part and parcel of a package that ensures that we're not just representing one religion above others, but actually trying to ensure that in what is very much a mixed melting pot within Sri Lanka, that all religions and faiths can live side by side, peaceably and with prosperity.
Mrs. Ellen Goodman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you for granting this urgent question. I'd like to congratulate my honourable friend, the member for Mitcham and Morden, in securing it. She's been very persistent, and she is right to bring the plight of these refugees to our attention in the House this morning. Can I thank the Minister of State as well for his response? I know he's very busy at the moment, covering a large number of countries, but he brings a dedication to these issues, and we're all grateful for that. Mr. Speaker, it has been a matter of great sadness that despite the surge of national unity led by the Sri Lankan government in the wake of the Easter Sunday attacks, groups of mindless individuals have instead responded to these attacks with reprisals against the refugee communities from Pakistan, Afghanistan and Iran. They have responded to an act of sectarian hatred with further acts of sectarian hatred, and that is ultimately what the terrorists want. So the Sri Lankan government has a duty to crack down on this violence and to protect those refugee communities, just as much as they have to track down the organisers of the Easter Sunday bombings. So, on behalf of Her Majesty's Opposition, I wholeheartedly endorse the demands made by Amnesty, Human Rights Watch and the other NGOs today about what the Sri Lankan government must do now to protect these refugees, make sure they're given adequate shelter and care while the situation is being resolved. And I'd ask the Minister of State to say today, not just that the government endorses those demands, but will press counterparts in Sri Lanka to act on them, and also to tell the House what support the government is providing to Sri Lanka, and to tell us whether, if any help is requested from the Sri Lankans, the British government will be complying with that request. Because, Mr. Speaker, as my honourable friend said, the bitter irony is that many of these refugees in Sri Lanka are there because they've already fled from religious persecution, only to find themselves under attack again. The government of Sri Lanka must urgently protect them.
May I thank the Honourable Lady for her kind words about my work. We've been on the other side of this chamber and other chambers in this place and on a number of occasions over the past 48 hours. But may I also say and thank her for her very constructive comments and her work that she does. She's absolutely right. We need to nip in the bud any return to sectarian hatred, something, of course, that is well known to many who have Sri Lanka close to their heart. And clearly, the report that has been made makes it very clear the expectations of the Sri Lankan government, and we very much hope to work closely with them. I have been to that country on 3 occasions as a minister over the past 2 years. It's a country that we do take seriously, but I was very keen that it was my right honourable friend from the Home Office who went out there in the immediate aftermath of the attacks, not least because I think in the important areas of working on institutionalised communication and preparedness that we could share some expertise. It's not for us to dictate that agenda, but obviously on the security and intelligence side, there is an important amount of cooperation that already goes on, but in terms of those structures for the future that will hopefully ensure that, as I say, any sectarian hatred is nipped in the bud, we need to work closely. So I know that my right honourable friend met up when he was there with key national security figures, the Defence Secretary, the State Minister for Defence, and indeed the Army Commander, as well, of course, as the Prime Minister, as I referred to earlier on. He also met up, I know, with the Roman Catholic Archbishop of Colombo. We see our role, as I say, not to dictate, but hopefully to provide a useful advice. And of course, in the more general sense, our own experience of what's happened in one part of the United Kingdom, in Northern Ireland, is something that can bear well, I hope, in terms of moving towards the reconciliation that all Sri Lankans deserve.
Dame Cheryl Gillen.
The Sri Lankan economy has been benefiting from increased tourism and particularly cruise ship visits recently. Can the Minister assure me that he keeps the travel advice for British citizens to Sri Lanka under constant review? And how can he ensure that we continue to have visitors to Sri Lanka contributing to their economy?
Can I thank my right honourable friend from Amersham and Chesham, Chesham and Amersham, I believe, actually, for her constructive thoughts, and she's absolutely right. Just to recap, on the 25th of April, the FCO amended its travel advice, advising against all but essential travel to Sri Lanka, except, of course, through airport transit. We obviously very much hope this can be adjusted as soon as possible when the security situation allows, but given the somewhat chaotic sense in the immediate aftermath of what had happened with the attacks, we felt that was the prudent thing. But she is absolutely right, whether it is cruises or indeed the fledgling but actually very successful tourism industry, we do understand it is going to be very badly impacted until such time as we feel it is wise to update that travel advice. I know the Foreign Secretary made a statement addressing the House on what steps the government will take in the aftermath of the attacks, and we very much hope that we will be in a position at the earliest opportunity, but that obviously will be led by evidence on the ground and the facts to be able to ease the travel restrictions that we put in place some 3 weeks ago.
Neil Gray.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, for granting this urgent question. I commend the honourable member from Mitcham and Morden for securing it, and I concur with the words that she expressed and the Shadow Minister also expressed, as well as the Minister of State, and we add to those messages of sympathy that have already been expressed to the people of Sri Lanka and all those who have been caught up in the horrendous terror attacks of Easter Sunday. And while it's clear some have heeded the very wise words of the Bishop of Colombo, Bishop Kana Gasebi, in response to the attacks, which was about compassion and tolerance, it's clear that some have not, and I hope now that those words will now be heeded. And this situation is a tragedy heaped on tragedy, Mr Speaker. Many of those caught up in the horrific terror attacks were already themselves refugees, Ahmadis and Christians from Pakistan, Shias from Afghanistan, and refugees from Iran who fled religious and ethnic and political persecution in their country. So I would urge the Minister to suggest what further help he can provide in assisting the UNHCR to assist in expediting asylum claims and also offer the Sri Lankan government assistance. If, for whatever reason, the Sri Lankan government cannot offer asylum themselves, what offers could the UK government and counterparts offer to ensure that these poor people are offered safe refuge as soon as possible?
I thank the honourable gentleman. I know he also put a UQ in, so I suspect he'll be doing more next week as well on other related matters. May I just say this? Clearly we are working together, and the pace at which we are working together has been increased in the aftermath of the attacks with the UN agencies. As I mentioned, some 412 individuals are already going through the resettlement process, and that resettlement obviously will be to other parts of the world. So we will continue to work closely. Obviously, there is a process that has to be gone through, but it is one that we will try to expedite along with all of our partners out in Sri Lanka to ensure that those refugees are moved on, who are entitled to be moved on, are moved on as quickly as possible. Mr Speaker, may I also just say this? I wanted to take, not in any way trivialise matters, but I think we're very pleased, obviously, to see the Sri Lankan cricket team has arrived in the UK for the World Cup that is imminent. Now, I understand that it was some relevance that I wanted to bring it in at this very point, because the first match of the one-day international series, I believe, is on Saturday week versus Scotland, of all places. So I hope, in true Scottish national style, that they will get a very good welcome when they play in Broughty Ferry or wherever it may be. Thank you.
Because the terrorists declared war on civil society and against the peace of Easter Sunday. What support can the government give the authorities in Sri Lanka to bring speedy decisions and actions against reprisal attacks? Because that would only be aiding the terrorists in their objectives.
My honourable friend is absolutely right that sectarian hatred needs to be stamped out, but clearly that is a matter for the Sri Lankan authorities, but we stand ready, obviously, to work and cooperate and assist in whatever way we may be asked to do.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I also thank my honourable friend for bringing this urgent question. Mr Speaker, the Minister mentions that there are 412 refugees in the UNHCR resettlement process at the moment. Can I press him on that and ask him how many of those the UK intends to take and what more we can do with the UNHCR in order to increase the number of refugees who are given resettlement and brought quickly to a safe haven?
Lady for Bristol West will excuse me. I will obviously write to her with more specific details once I have that to hand.
Rebecca Powell.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Would my right honourable friend commend the local Muslim communities that have given shelter already in mosques to so many refugees? And what more could this country do to help with those camps, which frankly sound pretty unpalatable at the moment?
I thank my honourable friend for what she said. Yes, as she rightly says, this can only be very much a short-term interim measure. We need to have a much more sustainable situation going forward. May I also just say this? We are spending, as the government, £8.3 million of conflict, stability and security fund money on interfaith dialogue, on reconciliation, police reform and training, and demining within Sri Lanka. That's a large sum for a large range of different work, but obviously I think elements of that hopefully will be able to find their way into dealing with this very urgent problem as well.
Thomas Simmons.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As my honourable friend for Mitcham and Morden has set out, these refugee communities belong to religious minorities. Can the Minister make clear to his Sri Lankan counterpart that there must be no question of them returning to Pakistan, Afghanistan or Iran, where they will inevitably face religious persecution?
I'm happy to reassure the honourable gentleman that, clearly, where there is a well-founded case for a refugee and asylum status, that there should be no question of that return to which he refers.
Stephen Kerr.
It's easy to find compassion for people that were persecuted, left their Pakistan, came to Sri Lanka and are now facing further persecution. Will the Minister of State confirm that he will stand up for the Ahmadis, who have been through so much? And is there something practical that the international community can do to help the Sri Lankan authorities on the ground?
I hope that I have gone into some detail as to what we are doing on the ground to my honourable friend for Sterling, but it is also the case that he's absolutely right. We will do all that we can. The plight of the Ahmadi, which is a global plight, is one that is close to our hearts. As my honourable friend is probably aware, Lord Ahmed himself is an Ahmadi Muslim.
Dr. David Drew.
Given that the underlying issue here is discrimination and many of these poor refugees come from Pakistan, what representations will the Minister make to Imran Khan to make it clear that the blasphemy laws have no place in a modern world? It's not only caused this problem, but obviously Asia Bibi and previously the deaths of Salman Taseer and my friend Shabar Bhatti. It's about time these laws were removed. Will he do something about it?
May I thank the honourable gentleman for Stroud and what he says. And he will be well aware that our own High Commission and our excellent High Commissioner Tom Drew in Islamabad does make it very clear the concerns that we have. And he's touched on the Asia Bibi case. I think all of us felt great relief. I mean, obviously, the security of her family is still forefront of our minds. I don't wish to comment any further speculation, but the fact that this matter has been resolved, I think, is a tribute not just to the Pakistan authorities, but in particular to the new Pakistani government. But we will, and I will endeavour to ensure that our High Commission is made well aware of the particular concerns that he raises.
Speaker, will the Minister undertake to raise with Sri Lanka the need to seek UNHCR assistance in managing the settlements so they are not de facto detention camps? And also, further efforts, I think, need to be made for the security of these refugees. And Sri Lanka needs to deploy adequate law enforcement officers to ensure the protection and security of these vulnerable people.
The Honourable Lady makes a very valid point that there is a risk, particularly if resettlement takes longer than we would all wish, that they become de facto detention camps, which is an unsatisfactory state of affairs, to put it mildly. As I said, my counterpart from the Home Office was in Sri Lanka only last week, and I know these sorts of issues were actively discussed, and we will continue, obviously, to make the case to which she is referred to.
John Brake.
Mr. Speaker, the Minister will be aware that the Ahmadi Muslim community in the UK are very active, including delivering condolences cards to Christian churches here following the attack in Sri Lanka, but also raising lots of money for charity in the UK and indeed abroad. If they choose to fundraise for the refugees in Sri Lanka, is that something that government will be able to match, or indeed better in terms of the fundraising?
I'd better be a little bit careful. Much as I've got these added responsibilities, I haven't got Treasury responsibilities as well, and I would rather not preempt that. But and to be serious to the Right Honourable Gentleman for Carshalton and Wallington, he's absolutely right. It would be useful if we were able to match in the way that we have in other occasions. Perhaps he could write me with specific details of that, and I will try and take it up with the Treasury and other departments.
All ethnic and religious vulnerable minorities in Sri Lanka must be protected. The Sri Lanka government has given an undertaking to do the protection of those who wish to worship their God. Ahmadis who now have fled Pakistan in fear are now afraid in Sri Lanka and seek somewhere to relocate. What has been done to assist those people to achieve that relocation?
I thank the honourable gentleman. He always speaks very much for the dispossessed across the world and for standing up for the freedom of religious belief. As I think I've said, we are working very closely to try and do all that we can, again, with international partners and particularly with the UN on the ground to try and make life better for those who are impacted. And obviously I will hope to report back either in FCO questions next week or indeed in due course about the progress of what is happening in Sri Lanka. Thank you.
Business question.